Hello everyone, welcome back to Young and Guilty. I'm your host Sarah, and before we begin this particular episode of Young and Guilty, I just wanted to offer a very serious content warning for this video. This episode contains graphic depictions of violence, murder, racism, and child abuse. What you're about to hear is based entirely on publicly available sources, and I have made every effort to ensure its factual accuracy and make clear where implicit bias may exist. Now, this episode is not intended at all to glorify the horrific crimes and actions committed by Nikolas Cruz, but rather to inform, educate, and document one of the most horrific and disturbing tragedies in recent American history. On February 14th, 2018, the quiet suburban city of Parkland, Florida, became the center of national nightmare when a former student brought an AR-15 to the public high school, Marjory Stoneman Douglas. 17 people were killed, 17 were wounded, and thousands of others, including students, teachers, first responders, and community members, were forced to carry painful scars to this day. I want to begin this case not talking about the shooting itself, how it happened, how it was executed, like my last episode, but I wanted this time to begin with the person who carried it out, because I feel that it is important to understand the horror of what happened. In order to understand that, we need to understand the context and the long and disturbing path that led to it, and more specifically, the kind of Nikolas Cruz's background and where he came from and why he was prompted to do this. So, Nikolas Jacob Cruz was born on September 24th, 1998. His biological mother is Brenda Woodard, and she battled a serious drug and alcohol addictions. In fact, doctors testified that Brenda had one of the more severe cases, a never-before-seen case of prenatal alcohol exposure. That was just it was extremely severe. It was one of the more severe cases they had ever seen of consuming alcohol while in pregnancy. Now, throughout her pregnancy, Brenda allegedly drank heavily, as well as commonly used drugs, especially cocaine. Now, even before Nikolas Cruz was born into the person that he is, he already had the odds stacked against him. Not even born yet, he was already destined to grow up in a troubled household, in a troubled environment. Now, because of his mother's severe addictions to alcohol and drugs, he was adopted by an older couple, Roger and Linda Cruz. Linda was around her 40s and Roger was in his 60s. So as I mentioned, they were an older couple, and later on they did adopt his younger half-brother, Zachary. Now, in the beginning, when Nikolas and Zachary were adopted by the Cruz, They were actually, as neighbors say, a very normal family, like just a normal older parents with their 2 sons. But in preschool, Nikolas began biting and hitting other children in his classroom. And at the age of 3, he was now showing signs of violence towards others. Now, by the age of 3, he was diagnosed as a, and I quote, developmentally delayed, end quote. So over time, that diagnosis grew into ADHD, autism, depression, and emotional behavioral disability. Now, in 2004, when Nikolas was just 5 years old, his adoptive father, Roger Cruz, had died of a heart attack. Now, I cannot imagine the pain of losing a parental figure, especially your father, but what made this all the more tragic for Nikolas was the fact that his father died right in front of him in the family living room, or the family den, what you want to call it. And many believe that his father's death and witnessing that was almost like a click and a turning point in Nikolas Cruz's life, specifically when things started to get from troubling, like his behavior towards other kids, to worse, showing more violent and more unacceptable behaviors. Now, as for Linda Cruz was alone. She had 2 sons, no job, and very little emotional support. Now, friends say that her mental state after Roger passed away began to deteriorate very badly. She became especially paranoid about spending money. She became financially paranoid, and she feared of not having that financial stability as she had no job. Now, this paranoia led to almost a neglectful care for her children. Specifically, she would padlock the refrigerator to make sure both Nikolas and Zachary, whenever they were hungry, they just couldn't get food, as she was scared that food would run out and she would have to spend money on groceries. Alongside that, she kept the air conditioning off in the summer heat. Now, if you know Florida summer heat, it gets extremely hot. Extremely hot. Take it from me. It gets extremely hot. It can get up to 102 and even more degrees in the summer. Now, Linda actually turned off the AC for her children, even during the Florida summers where there is just extreme heat all around. Now, teachers reported that Nikolas would come to school extremely hungry. And now this is definitely because his own mother was preventing him from eating food at home. His behavior gradually grew violent as a child. At age 9, he hit a neighborhood kid in the head with a rock. Now, this could have been something absolutely horrific. A head injury is an extremely serious injury to have, especially with a rock. Could crack some kid's head open, and Nikolas had presumably done that to a neighborhood child. Shortly after, he and his brother began to and admitted to torturing animals. So right here is a news article from WFSU, and it points out that Nikolas Cruz's dog actually died from eating a poisonous frog or toad, and so he decided to go on a killing spree on all of the toads in the neighborhood and basically commit genocide on toads. And he actually posted on his Instagram account in 2017 a picture of a dead toad and said, and I quote, "These things killed my dog, so I killed them pretty much," end quote. So right then and there, we can see his violent behavior starting to turn deadly, although it's not towards people, it is towards animals. Now, this is now recognized as one of the most alarming early warnings for future violent behavior. And I have seen that a lot with certain cases. Now, there is this one documentary on Netflix called Don't F with Cats. And it talks about this one serial killer who, I won't go too much in depth, but he did unalive someone with an ice pick. And this violent behavior, this hunt for him, actually started when he was torturing little baby cats. And this behavior has become notable for a lot of people that show violent behavior in the future, especially at such extremes as what this case is, and as well as what the case of the documentary Don't F with Cats show. So I have seen it in a lot of cases, and it is very important that when there are signs that, yes, someone that is violent is torturing animals, there could be something more there, and is actually a very big red flag. Now, when Nikolas was 13, a parent called the police after Nikolas got into a school fight. So he was now showing more violent behavior, now older, onto other students, other people. And that fight was only the beginning. Over the next year, he was involved in 26 school disciplinary incidents. So he had gotten into fights. He had gotten on probation for unacceptable behavior. So Nikolas was just not doing well in school. Teachers described him using racial slurs, drawing swastikas on his homework, and sketching stick figures, engaging or being engaged in sexual violence. It is also extremely important to note that his 8th grade teachers did show a lot of concern for his behavior and try to warn others of what Nikolas Cruz was capable of. In 8th grade, she even said, and from a direct quote, she said, "I strongly feel that Nikolas is a danger to the students and faculty at this school." And this is because he expressed a lot, as listed before, a lot of disturbing behavior, although they weren't necessarily violent, like actually harming someone other than the fights that he would get into. They did show violent actions that would go through his head and stuff that he was almost infatuated with. At 14, he threatened his own mother, so he threatened to unalive his own mother over an argument because his Xbox was being taken away from him. And so the sheriff's office actually investigated this, but mental health professionals decided that it was not serious enough for involuntary commitment. So it was not serious enough for them to step in and redirect him to a mental facility. Now, many of what I have just told you could have been as clear red flags of his violent behavior, but months prior to this massacre, there were a lot of red flags and warnings that went unanswered. So Cruz eventually transferred to Cross Creek School, which is a specialized campus for students with severe and emotional behavioral issues. And he was there for 2 years. Then he returned to mainstream school, so public school, Marjory Stoneman Douglas High, and his behavior did not improve at all. In February 2016, the Broward County Sheriff's Office received a report that Nikolas had posted a photo online onto his Instagram, and that photo included a variety of guns and said that he planned to shoot up the school. Now, this was in February of 2016, 2 years prior to the massacre. And the information was forwarded to the school's resource officer, and to this day, it is unclear if any action was taken at all from this claim. That's the first big red flag, which, in my opinion, now this is stating my opinion, should have been taken much more seriously than how it was taken. And the fact that it is unclear if any action was taken, for me, is completely irresponsible, not just in part of the authorities, but also from the school counselors, officers, etc. Later that year, a school resource officer filed a report saying that Nikolas Cruz was trying to hurt himself. Mental health officials were called for this case, and once again they determined that he did not meet the criteria for a mental health crisis. So once again, the fact that he was hurting himself just didn't meet the criteria for him to be admitted into a facility and get professional help. 8 hours later, after that, officers were called to his home again. And after he was reportedly hurting himself and talking about buying a gun. Now, in November, the Florida Department of Children and Families, which is also known as kind of like a CPS type of thing, Children Protective Services, opened a case citing medical neglect of his mental health. Now, his mother, like I said, absolutely spiraled after the death of her husband, and so because she was grieving so much, she completely neglected Nikolas and his brother and the clear signs of mental distress, mental illness that they showed. The report even included a chilling note, and this note read, "Nikolas has desires to buy a gun, but it is unknown what he is buying it for," end quote. The case that they opened was closed just 2 months later, with Cruz being described as a low-risk case. Now, I just want to take a moment to pause to say that knowing what he did, knowing that a case opened for him, knowing that 2 years prior to this massacre, he already stated that he wanted to buy a gun. He was already planning to do this, and absolutely nothing was done, in the fact that he was described as a low risk person. Now, that is something I believe that is just a little hard to believe, that they just ignored such a big sign. But then again, what is done is done. By 2017, he had been removed from the school again. 3 days after leaving Marjory Stoneman Douglas, he went to Sunrise Tactical Supply and bought himself an AR-15 rifle, which he would later use in the massacre. And if you thought the warning stopped there, they didn't. In September 17th, a YouTuber reported receiving a comment from a user named Nikolas Cruz that stated, and I quote, "I'm going to be the next school shooter," end quote. The FBI investigated this comment. However, they claimed that they could not identify who the user Nikolas Cruz was. So on his Instagram, he was already posting extremely concerning posts that included, as mentioned before, knives, guns, facial coverings, dead animals. It was extremely serious what he posted on his Instagram, yet no one took a moment and no authority took a moment to realize that perhaps they were dealing with someone of high risk, a high risk that could impose a danger to the community, to society, and all these signs were just completely ignored. Now, 2 months later, after the YouTube comment incident, in November, Linda Cruz died of pneumonia. If Nikolas was not completely unraveled before, he is now. Because he lost his two parents, he moved in with a family friend, but within weeks, they called the police after finding him burying ammunition in their backyard and obsessing over the AR-15 that he bought. He was asked to leave by that family friend, and he later moved in with another classmate's family. Now, in January 18th, a woman called the FBI tip line and warned them that Nikolas Cruz was unstable, that he owned guns and posted disturbing content online and might become a school shooter. Even with this tip, a month prior from the massacre, the tragedy that happened, absolutely nothing was done. 6 days later, Nikolas Cruz recorded videos on his phone. In them, he openly talked about getting into an Uber, driving to Marjory Stoneman Douglas, and shooting the students. Now, I would like to pause the video right here before we continue and give the following warnings to whoever's watching, the viewers who are watching. I will be showing videos from his social media, 3 videos from his social media that he posted days prior to the massacre. And I just wanted to give a warning that if you are triggered by the topic of gun violence, then I suggest for you to click away from this video and proceed to watch perhaps another video or something else, because this is real footage from his social media that I will be showing.
So, take an Uber in the afternoon before 2:40. From there, I'll go onto school campus, walk up the stairs, unload my bags, and get my AR and shoot people down at the main courtyard. Hello, my name is Nick, and I'm going to be the next school 2018. My goal is at least 20 people. Location is Stoneman Douglas in Parkland, Florida. It's going to be a big event. And when you see me on the news, you'll all know who I am. You're all going to die. Today is the day that it all begins. The day of my massacre shall begin. All the kids in school will in fear and hide. From the wrath of my power, they will know who I am. I hate everyone and everything. With the power of my AR, you will all know who I am. You will all know who my name is.
All of these videos detailed his plans, exactly what he was going to do, and none of them were discovered until after it was too late. Before I get into what happened the day of the tragedy, I would just once again like to state a warning. If you are sensitive or triggered by gun violence or any violence in general, I suggest you click away from the video. But this is just a fair warning before I begin. Now, February 14th, 2008. At 2:19 p.m., Nikolas Cruz stepped onto the Marjory Stoneman Douglas campus with a black duffel bag and a tactical vest. So, bulletproof vest. He took out the AR-15 and began walking towards Building 12. Now, a student named Christopher McKenna stepped into the stairwell and froze when he saw Cruz with the weapon. Nikolas Cruz told him, direct quote, "You better get out of here. Something bad is about to happen," end quote. And so McKenna, seeing the AR-15 in his arms, took that advice and ran. Cruz then walked into the first floor hallway and began firing. In the span of just 6 minutes, he shot and killed students and teachers in 4 different classrooms. Some were killed walking back to class from so said fire alarm. Others were shot through windows and doors. One teacher was killed holding the door, trying to get his students to safety. Chaos spread throughout the halls. Screams echoed across the building, and phone calls poured into 911 dispatch. As Cruz reloaded and continued firing, the school resource officer, Scott Peterson, arrived outside the building and stayed there. Now, Scott Peterson never went inside the building. He later claimed that he thought the shots were coming from outside of the building, but video evidence and multiple investigations and investigators have strongly disputed that and claimed that the shots were clearly coming from inside of the building. After firing more than 150 rounds, Cruz dropped his rifle and his vest, exited the building, Building 12, also known as the Freshman Building, and walked off campus, blending in with the fleeing students. Now, Nikolas Cruz didn't go back home. In fact, he went to a nearby Walmart. And in that Walmart that is not even a mile from the school, there is a Subway inside, and he went inside of the Subway and bought himself a drink, completely calm, as if he never entered the school in the first place, as if it was just a normal day. He bought himself a drink. Then later he exited the Subway and he decided that he would take his leisurely walk to McDonald's, which is, once again, not even a mile away from the Walmart. Now, at 3:40 p.m., he was located by the Coconut Creek Police Department and taken into custody without incident. Now, throughout his interrogation is actually made public, so you could find it on YouTube by just searching up Nikolas Cruz interrogation, and it is of the full 10-hour footage, 10-hour, 22-minute, 16-second footage of his interrogation, and I watched it. I found that his interrogation was particularly interesting, and I say that because there is a moment where you can see that he first starts with the facade of feeling guilty, like he was gonna go with, I don't know what I just did, like breaking down crying, and in just a split second, in a split snap of your fingers, you see him switch into playing the role of the actor, and more specifically saying that there are demons inside of his head and that he is being controlled by the demons. So now you can kind of see him start to lead towards the insanity plea. Now, in this interrogation, initially, like I said, he was very quiet. When the officer asked him what was going on, and Cruz was in that state where he just turned on the role of the actor, of the insane, that he was also a victim too of his own voices, Cruz reportedly said, or answered to the question of what was going on, he said, "The demons, voices." Now, hours after the shooting, Cruz is in the interrogation room, and when the detective leaves him alone, we see footage that he is scratching his wrists as to trying to harm himself. He's punching himself. He's muttering to himself. And he told detectives that a demonic voice in his head told him to commit the crime. Now, his behavior is extremely interesting. By interesting, I don't mean in an amusing way, but interesting in how he plays this role, especially his actions throughout the entire interrogation. And he knows he's being recorded when he's alone, so his actions when he's alone in the interrogation room as well is also almost terrifying, how he immediately locks into this role of being insane. Now, investigators were not convinced with this act at all. They were not convinced that he could be legally put as insane. They pointed out that he had smoked marijuana and taken Xanax, so he was also abusing substances. And Xanax is a relaxant, so it is one of the most abused medications before. Like, he's taken these things before. However, he never mentioned voices to absolutely anyone. And so they found it interesting that right when the detective asked him what was wrong, he immediately said voices, although he had no past of having these voices in his head. Now, it is important to note that to be legally sentenced to have the insanity plea, you, at the moment that you commit the crime, you must not know between right and wrong. And with Nikolas Cruz, you see his pre-planned actions. You see his plan before he actually commits this massacre. So right off the bat, he does not fit at all the criteria of pleading insanity. Now, the longer the interrogation went on, the more the officers knew, and the more it appeared that Cruz was performing an act. Over the following days, the nation would learn the name and the faces of the 17 innocent victims. Out of respect for time, I won't list all of them or every name here, but all 17 of them included talented athletes, teachers who died shielding their students, and students who dreamed of helping others, becoming doctors, writers, researchers, and parents. Many of the victims were just 14 and 15 years old, so it is absolutely horrific to think that even I have outlived them. In the months that followed, Parkland saw two more tragedies. Two students who survived this shooting took their own lives, overcome by survivor's guilt and post-traumatic stress. So here we can clearly say that Nikolas Cruz not only took 17 lives, but took 19 lives and more. Days and months following the shooting, the story would become widespread news by the time of Cruz's arraignment hearing on the 14th of March, 2018. There would be disturbing reports of him receiving fan mail and donations into his commissary accounts from crazed young women and older men around the country. Broward County Public Defender Howard Fickelson described how officers read Cruz a few religious ones that extended wishes for his soul to come to God, but have not and will not read him the fan letters or share photos of scantily crazy teenage girls. Finkelstein expressed worries about how young boys and girls will start to view Cruz in an elevated way, looking up to his fame and notoriety. There were even reports of Facebook support groups called Nikolas Cruz First Victim, stating that he was a victim of bullying and a victim of child neglect. And this group has since been deleted, but it had over 300 members. His fame has been compared to Ted Bundy, who was a rapist and a murderer, but also received thousands and thousands of love letters from women all around the country while he was on trial and incarcerated. Now, it is important to note that the fact or the case that Nikolas was a victim, his victimization of the mental health system, that he was a victim of his own voices, actually became a central part of the defense's case, and the defense actually built around that idea that Cruz was a victim as well. Now, after Nikolas Cruz pled guilty to 17 counts of premeditated murder and 17 counts of attempted murder, the case proceeded to the penalty phase in July 2022. Now, this case was extremely elongated, more than it should have. 4 entire years for him to get his sentencing. That is just an extremely long time. The sole question before the jury was not whether or not Nikolas Cruz was guilty, as he was, but rather if Cruz should face death penalty or life in prison without parole. Now, the trial lasted nearly 3 months. Now, the trial of whether he should get death or life without sentence, not the trial as a whole. The trial as a whole lasted 4 entire years. Now, these 3 months included testimonies of 91 prosecution witnesses. So survivors described the chilling and horrific details of February 14th. Now, jurors listened to audio recordings from inside of the classrooms, and some even wiped their eyes as students spoke softly about watching their friends die before their eyes. One of the most emotional moments came when Alyssa Aladeff's father, Dr. Ian Aladeff, took the stand. Now, once again, this trial was broadcasted, so you can watch it on your own. Now, Dr. Ian Aladeff said, "My 14-year-old daughter was exactly where she was supposed to be that day, in English class. She was supposed to grow up, become a lawyer, and have a family. But instead, her life was ripped away. A piece of my heart wasn't just cut out, it was ripped out of my chest. For 4 years, I've tried to stay strong for my family, while inside I burn like an inferno." Jamie Gutenberg, another victim's father, Fred Gutenberg, addressed Cruz directly from the witness box and said, "You don't deserve to live another day. My daughter died with bullets ripping through her body, and today I'm forced to accept that her killer gets to wake up every morning and breathe." End quote. Several jurors looked away when the surveillance footage was played showing Cruz firing into classrooms. Now, during one of the videos, a woman in the gallery could be heard whispering, "Turn it off. Please turn it off." The defense moved for a mistrial, claiming that outburst would prejudice the jury. Now, the judge, Elizabeth Schreier actually denied the motion immediately. The prosecution then introduced disturbing YouTube comments and internet searches that were found in Cruz's devices. One of them stating, and I quote, "I can't wait to kill black people and rape a girl," end quote. Another one stated, and I quote, "In 2020, you'll hear me on the news. I will be heavily armed. No mercy," end quote. They also presented recent drawings made by Cruz in his jail cell. Written in his own blood were references to devil worship as well as the number 666, alongside a note written and addressed to the next school shooter that read, and I quote, "Kill them all, you will become a god," end quote. The defense, in contrast, focused almost entirely on Nikolas Cruz's childhood. They argued that prenatal exposure to drugs and alcohol, the death of both of his adoptive parents, and years of emotional neglect were responsible for his violent behavior. Now, psychologists hired by the defense described him as brain damaged and incapable of fully understanding right from wrong. That argument drew visible anger from many of the families in the courtroom, not just them, but also netizens. Now, netizens stands for the citizens of the internet, and I will be using that term from now on when I refer to them. On October 13th, 2022, the jury returned with their decision. The courtroom was silent as the clerk read the verdict. Life in prison without parole on all 34 counts. 3 jurors had refused to vote for death. Now, to get the death penalty, all jurors must unanimously agree. Now, if one juror were to say, "I don't agree with the death penalty," the person will probably just get life in parole. But all jurors must agree that the defendant deserves death penalty. It has to be a unanimous vote. This is not just in Florida, but also in other states that still have the death penalty in their legal system. This is how it works. Now, the reaction was swift. Several family members gasped, some cried, and some just shook their heads in disbelief. Now, many people that were present that day, as well as netizens, have discussed both sides of the debate, whether he deserved life in prison or whether he didn't. Some netizens believe that he deserved life in prison because it is unfair for the victims. They were taken from their lives very early on, from their futures, from the careers they could have built very early on in their lives. And the fact that he gets to have the privilege of being alive is just unfair. Other netizens believe that we, as a community, as a society, as a justice system, should not stoop as low to his level as to take another life in such a tragedy. Do what you will with that information, with that debate. I just want to show you what both sides of netizens, people online, say about this. Now, as for the family members in the courtroom, they actually completely disagreed with the sentencing. Midge Schwartz, whose son Nikolas was killed, addressed the court. "You pressed the barrel of that gun against my son's chest and pulled the trigger. Now we're told that your life still has value. You show no mercy, and I pray the prisoners show you the same kind of mercy you showed my son," end quote. Manuel Oliver, father of Joaquin Oliver, ended his statement with a chilling prediction. "You may have taken my son's body, but you will never take the love we have for him. One day, Prison will take care of what this court would not, end quote. Even the judge herself appeared emotional when she addressed him and addressed the final verdict to Nikolas. She said, "Mr. Cruz, I sentence you to 34 consecutive life sentences. You will never leave custody. You will never walk free again." And yet, out of all of the suffering, the families of these victims never stayed silent. They never faded away. They organized, they created movements, foundations, they pushed for legislation and real change. Alyssa's Alert is one of them, which is a law requiring panic alarms systems in all Florida schools. The Scott Beagle Memorial Fund provides a summer camp scholarship for children impacted by gun violence. Safe Schools for Alex, Orange Ribbons for Jamie, the Change the Ref Foundation, Meadows Movement, and many more, all created by grieving parents who transform their pain into meaningful action. Students who survived the Marjory Stoneman Douglas shooting also stepped forward and formed the Never Again movement and held one of the largest youth-led demonstrations in U.S. history to call for reform. None of this brings back the victims. None of this erases what happened in the freshman building, Building 12. But it shows us something important, that even in the face of absolute horror, people will still fight for good. That love still exists alongside unimaginable pain. And that the story of the victims will not be defined by the actions of one hateful and broken individual. The Parkland shooting is one of the most heartbreaking examples of what can happen when warning signs are ignored and when systems just fail us. Let it never be forgotten that behind every statistic is a child, a family, a soul, a story, a life. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Young and Guilty. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. I do hope that it was thought-provoking. You developed your own thoughts to it, but also educated yourself on such an important case. Once again, I'm your host, Sarah. This is the Young and Guilty podcast, and I'll see you in the next one.